Yeah, do you want to hear my funny story from a go-kart race that I was in?
Yes, go ahead.
You're probably going to laugh at this because I remember trying not to laugh when I was on the podium, but anyway, years ago in my teen years, back when I would race go-karts every now and then, I'm sort of retired now because I realized I wasn't going to be able to get my driver's license with, me being autistic because of
Okay.
just certain parts of it. So I ended up retiring, but anyway, I did some go-karting in my teen years, normally at carnivals and all that. But anyway, there was one race. I usually did pretty good, but there was one race that I won that I really should never have won. And basically, what happened was the go-kart I was driving was terrible. Like it was understeering and not going through the corners very well. And it was very slow, even though it was fourth place in line for the start. And
Right.
I just remember expecting to finish last. And then the race went, the pole sitter was an Englishman and he had a 10 times better go-kart than I did. And he was the one that should have won that race. But anyway, we got going at the start. And in the first turn, the Englishman turned way too hard and spun out and wrecked literally everybody except me.
No way.
Yeah, and so he depleted the whole field. Like a lot of the go karts had to go back to the garage, and I was allowed to continue. And I went on to be the only person to complete a lap. And well, this is where it gets funny. When I finished the 25 lap race, I crossed the start finish line, and normally you have to do a victory lap before doing burnouts so that you allow others to finish. But
Right.
knowing that nobody was out there, I took the
Yeah.
wheel, and the minute I crossed the start finish line, I began doing burnouts.
Good for you.
And then afterwards, when I came back to the garage, what ended up happening was I stood on the podium with the medal and all that, and with a couple other guys that didn't finish but were credited with second and third. And I looked
Right.
over my shoulder and saw the Englishman with his accent trying to tell a whole crowd of angry drivers, sorry, didn't mean to do that. This is my first start. And I just remember looking at it and trying not to laugh like,
Well, you just never know. You just never know what might happen. That's what's great about sports, right?
yeah,
The underdog always has a chance, right? So that's great.
yeah. That's my funniest memory I can think of.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of something really funny that happened to me, but the funniest thing that I can think of was when we were doing some endurance racing in the Canadian Club Series. There was one race, I think it was a 4 hour race, and my teammate at the time, he I don't think he thought it was very hot, and I don't think he thought too much about one of the things that I've known with my dad is you have to really make sure you're prepping yourself, your body to go through a really hard, long, especially a hot race, right? So I slept really well the night before, and I ate a really clean lunch, and I was drinking water and Gatorade all day, and I was sitting in the shade in the trailer, and my teammate was kind of eating hot dogs and tanning a little bit and kind of hanging out maybe a little too much, and he got pretty sick, I think, in the car within the first hour of the race. So he came in, and I remember I saw through his visor he just was really red, and I knew, okay, well, I'm gonna have to do 3+ hours of this race. So I went in and did that, and it was a tough one to get into the end of that one. It was really felt like my brain was getting cooked a little bit in my helmet. But all of that stuff, like your story, it's all good experience, and it all at the end of the day is a good memory, right? So we made it through that.
Yeah. So I must ask after that, what is your all-time favorite memory in your racing career, as far as wins or races you were in?
Yeah, I mean, I won more. Yeah, I won at the club level a bit. I'm credited as being a champion in the Porsche Cup Series. The unfortunate truth of that is there was about 15 cars that year, and 14 of them were the brand new platinum class Porsches, and I was the only one in the gold cup with the older car. So I all I had to do basically was start the first race, and I was the champion. But the whole season racing against cars that were faster, inherently faster. It was really mentally tough, but I think I learned a lot of valuable lessons from essentially failing a lot of that season, where it was just, could I just try to get into the top 10, and we did that a couple of times. But my favorite memory so far, I think, was the race we did in 2022 at the Grand Prix of Trois-Rivières. Trois-Rivières is just a really historic race in Canada. I think it started in the 70s or late 60s maybe, and it was where Gilles Villeneuve got scouted basically by James Hunt and some of the F1 drivers back then who would come and race Formula Atlantic. And there's a track my dad really liked racing at. They used to race LMS IMSA cars there in the 2000s, which is just crazy to think of because it's such a tight and technical street track up in Canada here. But it's a super historic track. The whole town of Trois-Rivières comes out for the event. It's really, really a big deal for us in Canada. So we had basically tested as much as possible with the car that we had, and really tailored it to try and make it good for this race. And like I said, we came out and I just I kind of qualified on the same row as Jacques Villeneuve, which is super cool. But then for us, the race really unfolded kind of perfectly for us. We had a good pit strategy. We were running in the top 5 like the whole race, and racing with some of the guys I look up to in the series, like Andrew Ranger and Dumoulin and Tagliani, and some of the top guys in Canada. And it was kind of good to feel that we had gotten there. And I actually got spun out about 5 or 6 laps from the finish, and I was running 4th or 5th at the time, I think. And so I went all the way back to 13th, and as usually happens, there was a NASCAR overtime, and in overtime so on 2 laps basically I was able to go from 13th to 6th in 2 laps, and just to have a race where it's a long race. It's a 2.5-2 hour race, and to have a race where kind of, even though things didn't come together and we didn't get the finish that we wanted, it was just a really solid performance. And I felt like it was a race where I kind of gave everything I had from lap 1, and I only made a couple mistakes, which is good. So that was probably my favorite race that I've run so far. And it was funny because my dad was he is my spotter and has been, but you'll probably think this is funny, Doug, but at one point in the race, my radio came undone. I don't know how. It just kind of pulled. Maybe at one point I was doing a little bit too much driving, or getting a little too sideways, and I kind of pulled my radio out at one point. And it was a long green flag run, and every time I was on the straightaway, I was driving with one hand and trying to plug my radio back into my helmet, and I couldn't figure it out. So finally I gave up, and about 15, 20 laps goes by, and we finally get a caution. And so on the caution, I start driving with my knees, and I plug my radio back in, and my dad's still talking, and he had no idea that, for about 20 laps, I had no radio contact with him, and he's still talking like, everything's all good. And I was like, yeah, I haven't heard anything you said for about 20 laps. He goes, oh, okay. I was wondering, I thought maybe you were just really focused. So
That reminds me actually of 2 races in NASCAR that your dad was in. The first one you mentioned reminded me of Montreal, when he got wrecked by Kevin Harvick. And
yeah,
I think when the restart happened, he was like 18th or something like that. And he drove up to like 4th place in only 2 laps.
Yeah, he's had a few of those. I think he's really good on his equipment. He's always been like that, and I think hopefully that's something that I've kind of learned from him, because definitely at the end of the Trois-Rivières race, when you get to the end of a race like that, it's not easy to make that many passes in a couple laps, but it becomes easier if people don't have much left in their brakes or their tires. And I was catching guys coming off of corners where, it was obvious that they were struggling, just with their tires and getting super loose coming off of a corner. And then you can almost basically just pass them easily, under braking into the next corner. So I think that's something that he's definitely done. And, I've seen it. And I remember that race and countless others where he's, I think the Sonoma race that I was talking about, he was, when he had to pit at the very end of the race and they kind of messed up the strategy, he went, way back to like 20 something and finished, I think, sixth or seventh or eighth or something like that. So, but it's, you got to take care of your equipment. You got to have something to race with at the end. And that's, one of the biggest things about these NASCAR races is you got to get to the end and you got to make sure you got to have something in store for that late race caution. So it's really, really fun.
Yeah. And then I think at Watkins Glen after Montreal, I think your dad controlled the early parts of the race. And then he had a radio problem. And I think he said afterwards, after the race, that the radio was out for the rest of the race. And he said afterwards, that's not an excuse, though, for ending up in the gravel, which meant tangle with Scott Pruitt, I believe, on the final.
Oh, yes. I remember that. I remember that one. Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, that's the thing is that, I'm not sure what they use at the highest level, but in that series and certainly for our series, it's just a two-way Motorola radio. So I mean, sometimes analog technology or whatever it can crap out a little bit. So they're not foolproof, these things. And obviously from then on with me, I made sure I double taped my radio harness there. So it's it's always something. It's a lot of variables in racing, and I think that's why we people who love it so much, just because it's very complex. It's not a game, like hockey or football where you can kind of get a sense of what the script is kind of like. In certain football games, for example, it's going to be a defense heavy game or a run heavy game. Racing is always changing, and anything can happen on the last lap, and anything can happen at all times. So it's a unique sport for sure.